Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show. Today, bringing another really awesome guest involved in creating a better tomorrow for many people out there. Today on the show, we have the honor of being joined by George Vradenburg, who is the chairman and co-founder of Us Against Alzheimer's, which is a nonprofit organization dedicated to ending Alzheimer's disease. The organization advocates for increased research funding, policy changes, and provides resources for both individuals and families affected by the disease, and ultimately emphasizes the importance of prevention, early detection, and access to treatment. Under Mr. Vradenburg's leadership, Us Against Alzheimer's convenes both Leaders Engaged in Alzheimer's Disease Coalition as well as the Global CEO Initiative on Alzheimer's Disease. And under his leadership, recently launched the Swiss-US-based global initiative to prevent Alzheimer's called Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, which we previously profiled on the show. There he serves as founding chairman. He's also a founding member of the World Dementia Council. Mr. Vradenburg is also a dedicated member of the Washington Civic and Philanthropic community, has been a member of the Council of Foreign Relations and the Economic Club of Washington, and has served in several senior leadership executive roles and legal positions at CBS, Fox, and AOL Time Warner. A lot of very important themes to get into today. Honored to have him with us. George Vradenburg, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Well, thank you for having me on your show.
Yeah, no, great having you. George, I would just really like to start off because, we have profiled various parts of your organization in the past. I really hand things over to you for a few minutes just to further introduce yourself. And I think, looking back, I neglected to mention that you founded the current organization with your late wife, Trish, who herself was a caregiver of someone with Alzheimer's disease back in the 1990s, her mother. Would love to hear sort of a little bit of the early story here, because you are a supporter of many causes, and this one obviously became very near and dear to you some time ago.
Well, we got into this with Trish and with two other co-founders, John Dwyer, who currently serves as president of the Global Alzheimer's Platform Foundation, a spin-off organization that does clinical trials in this space, and Merle Comer, who is a 24-year caregiver for her husband, and for the last 10 years of that with her mother at home, taking care of them. So the three of us deeply touched by this disease because my wife's family, she lost her grandmother, her mother, and although she passed away from a heart attack 8 years ago. Her brother has since died of the disease. So we've had three generations of her family with dementia, and her family is my family, and my kids and my grandkids are directly in line to get this disease if we don't make faster progress. So we started raising money for the Alzheimer's Association and the National Alzheimer's Gala in 2003. I started working with Newt Gingrich on something called the Alzheimer's Task Force, modeled after the Iraqi task force at the time. So 10 prominent Americans who were not in the Alzheimer's field to recommend what the country ought to do. They recommended a national strategic plan. That national strategic plan turned into the National Alzheimer's Project Act in 2010. And that set in motion a series of planning activities and advocacy on our part to get Congress to over-allocate additional funds for Alzheimer's at the NIH and greater attention to the issue at the FDA and at Medicare. So we started actually as a as a C4 and a PAC. We didn't actually start a C3 until a year or two later, because we were told at the time we founded our organization by the Alzheimer's Association and others that we would never succeed in persuading Congress to allocate more money to Alzheimer's disproportionately, shall we say, than just the normal allocation of money to the NIH, which then at the time went largely to infectious disease and cancer. And so if we got another dollar for NIH, it would all go to infectious disease and cancer, and there'd be a couple pennies for Alzheimer's. Well, that for a family that's been deeply affected by the disease, that wasn't an adequate answer. So we started basically starting a National Alzheimer's Gala, and then our strategic plan was to work very closely with Congress to persuade them that they ought to allocate more money in their appropriations to Alzheimer's disease than just the normal allocation to NIH. And the main argument, and indeed probably the most compelling argument, the two compelling arguments. One was how much does it cost the United States government to care for people with Alzheimer's? And it turned out to be several $100 billion. And at the time, we were only investing about $400 million in trying to cure a problem that was $200 billion in size. Now, the cost of the federal government's now gone to $360 billion, and we're now allocating $4 billion a year. So we're still under allocating, in my estimation, the cure to a disease that is not only today costing the United States government $360 billion, but projected to be closer to $1 trillion and potentially in excess of the Defense Department expenditures in the next 25 years. So that sort of pure economic argument was pretty compelling. It also turned out to be very helpful that a number of members of Congress were experiencing this in their own families, their parents, their in-laws. They were beginning to experience this disease personally. And they began to see how much of an impact it makes on a family, not just on the individual with the disease, but the family in terms of financial requirements, in terms of emotional support, in terms of caregiving requirements, typically 2/3 women. Daughter-in-laws were taking on the responsibilities for caregiving and leaving the workforce. So they began to see the personal impact of this disease. And of course, the disease runs a course over 8 to 10 years. So this is not something that it's not a disease that, this is cruel, but from which you pass quickly and easily. This is a disease that lasts over a long period of time. So those two arguments began to shift the weight in the federal government. And so we have been able to raise a significant amount of additional money for basic research. But of course, from a patient's point of view, putting more money into academic institutions to find insights is probably important, maybe essential, but it's not sufficient because we need medicines. So the next elevation, evolution, if you will, of our organization was to create a corporate roundtable about 2 to 3 years later after our founding, called the Global CEO Initiative on Alzheimer's, in which we invited all of the companies, biotechs and pharma companies that had a potential drug in this space to join and to tell the patients, inform us, what is it that's needed in order to get more medicines to market? So the next thing in line in terms of the evolution of the company organization was to get a closer knit relationship with industry who could inform us about what patients and industry might, working together, increase the volume of investment by business and the number of drugs in the pipeline. So that started, and of course, that's now evolved into a pretty major independent force in itself, as we have now become pretty much the central clearinghouse for blood tests, digital cognitive assessments, and indeed, since our mission is to prevent Alzheimer's, we now have a vaccine working group on Alzheimer's, which is companies and regulators from around the world. So that is taken on that massive. And then, of course, the next problem is getting any drugs through clinical trials.
Mm-hmm.
So we started a clinical trials operation, initially supported by industry, now cash positive on its own, and now we're spinning that out in order to get access to venture capital to build a much stronger, more robust, more efficient, more effective, more highly technology-oriented clinical trial system for Alzheimer's. Then, of course, the next problem is payers and the Medicare system, which we've now dealt with. But in the end, you have to have a delivery system. So the healthcare system, which is not used to detecting cognitive impairment or diagnosing Alzheimer's, and very neurology centric, very high cost imaging equipment centric, was simply not adequate to the task, and hence our championing of a broader use of blood tests and digital cognitive assessments rather than paper and pencil and big lab equipment. We got called in 2020 by the World Economic Forum. Klaus Schwab called me and said, I believe now that Alzheimer's is as large a global health issue as infectious disease. And I would like to incubate here with you a global mechanism that links the efforts in the global north and the global south, where most of the cases of dementia in the world exist. 2/3 today, 80% by 2050 of cases of dementia will be in the global south. So we did that alongside Gavi and Seppi. We're pretty new to that game, started in the COVID period, which means that we've had a slower start than I would have wanted, but nevertheless, we now have a global mechanism located in Switzerland called the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative. So this is an evolution from a personal mission because we've been affected, my two co-founders affected by this disease, into a lifetime mission to prevent Alzheimer's. Therapeutic means yes, and now a new brain health strategy, reducing the risk of getting dementia in late life by intervening everywhere from infancy through adolescence through middle life. Because we now know through work that the Lancet Commission has done that we can probably prevent now 45% of the cases of dementia if we change our lifestyle and if we take care of comorbidities and if we do a variety of things that actually build the resilience of our brains through education, training, and other steps. So that's a very long explanation of the evolution of the mission.
It's a great explanation, and again, having profiled some of your team in the past from DAC and folks like Phil Farrell, per the Moonshot initiatives, I enjoyed seeing this all develop. You're talking now globally, and I'm stealing some of the numbers off your website. Clear, here we are in 2025. Come 2050, if we don't continue to do a lot of what you're talking about, some of these numbers get out of hand, especially this $1 trillion number, which is projected to raise to somewhere $9 to $10 trillion by 2050. You emphasize the importance again of prevention, early detection. Introduce us to this theme that which comes up in your materials. You talk about a lot of brain house, which we'll be getting to, of Brainspan, because we on the show we talk a lot about lifespan. Okay, this is how long we live, Healthspan, how long we live in a healthy state. The area of Brainspan in terms of sort of this duration of our good cognitive abilities, which not just is a quality of life issue, but affects a lot of the economic stuff we're going to be getting to. Extremely important topic. Introduce us to the concept of Brainspan, if you would, George.
Well, it turns out through a variety of research efforts, as well as economic experts, as well as epidemiologists, that there are a variety. Let me start earlier. We are born with the same brain we die with. This does not change. And so what causes some people to be able to succeed in life, to achieve high levels of education, high levels of professional accomplishment, and other people's to sort of slip by the wayside and not be able to achieve? Well, it turns out that much of that has to do with the brain. What kind of parents you have, what kind of nutrition your mother has, how you're treated as a child. Are you basically abandoned? Are you over dictated to, or do you allow free play? All the autism questions and addiction questions in teenage years affect your brain. And as a consequence, those effects, adverse or positive, have a lifetime effect on your brain. You can overcome them, perhaps, but the more insults to your brain, the harder it is to overcome. And so the deterioration of the brain through life, or the resilience of your brain through life, is determined by a wide variety of factors that we are now only truly understanding in spades. And as a consequence, thinking through what your lifespan is, so I can live to 100 years, but am I healthy? Generally, am I frail? Do I am cognitively impaired in my last 10 years of life? If you are frail, even if you have your brain fully performing, you can enjoy life. You can enjoy the wedding of your grandchildren. You can enjoy the wedding of your great grandchildren. You can enjoy life. You can enrich your life. But if you have a cognitive impairment, even though you be healthy or even though you be frail, if you're cognitively healthy, you can still participate in life and have an emotionally rich life. So the notion of health span traditionally has been thought to be frailty and other short-term diseases. But we should be making a checkup from the neck up as common and routine and as understood as a checkup from the neck down. And we don't do that. We have not paid attention to the brain like we paid attention to the heart, or we've paid attention to our limbs, or paid attention to our kidney or other bodily organs. We have not paid attention in the health system field or in our daily lives to our brain. And we're beginning to. We're beginning to. We have a long way to go, but we're beginning to pay attention to the quality and performance of our brain during our lives.
Excellent. So, January 2025 of the Davos Alzheimer Collaborative convenes, and you introduce the first Brain House initiative. So this is a first of what is a multi-year effort to promote these principles that you're talking about in terms of brain health across a life course, all around the world. And it's quite interesting because you introduce several themes, and we'll be getting into these individually, but and two of these, that I'd like just to start with. One, this principle of the brain economy, this sort of economic belief that ultimately brain health is extremely meaningful driver of economic growth and economic sustainability throughout the world. And then the principle of brain capital, which refers to sort of the economic output of having positive brain health. And we'll be getting into some examples and some of the different sessions. But you talk about sort of potentially a $26 trillion of economic opportunity here by enhancing Brainspan in this context. Introduce us to these themes, if you would. I think they're kind of important, and we don't normally hear about them.
Sure. The question you just asked me was about brain health, and that is something that is personal to each of us and to our families, and how we live a rich and full and meaningful life as long as we are able to. Brain capital is a concept that essentially says brain health is a business issue. So we have found that the steps that businesses are taking in order to mitigate mental health and stress and other issues in the business world are actually steps that, in fact, enhance your brain resilience. So the notion that an individual business is going to promote increased mental health services or support services for its employees, motivate them to have a purposeful activity at work, motivate them to be more creative, motivate them to be more committed to the company's outcome and to the goals of the company, turn out to be actually interventions that have the effect of increasing the power and resilience of your brain against late life disease. So that is a brain capital notion. Now you extend that to an economy where you have fewer workers as a percentage of the total population than we've had historically. As the aging population in the United States and Europe and Japan and China, we have upside down demographics. You have more older people than you have young people. Well, you're going to need those younger people to be more productive than their generations of the past if we're to maintain the same degree of economic growth and economic productivity that we've had historically, and the economic material wealth that we have been able to generate in the 20th century through the conquering of infectious diseases. So that's the concept of brain capital, both as a business strategy and as a national strategy to make sure their national economies are productive and resilient in the face of declining working age populations. So that's brain health, an individual level, and the health issue. Brain capital is a business issue and a worker productivity issue, which is important to business. It's also important to national economies. Hence, brain health, brain capital, and the brain economy. Now, the question is, okay, I get the concepts. What does that mean? What do I do differently? So part of it is working at scale, at the global level with business. What is business doing to enhance the purposefulness, the creativity, the intelligence, the motivation of people in the workforce? So that's a huge issue. And part of that, importantly, that's been ignored for so long is working age women. Working age women tend to be, at a certain point, menopausal women. And menopause turns out to change the hormonal structure and performance in women's brains in ways that affect their risk for dementia. So, in fact, women are particularly distinct, not necessarily more important or less important, but distinct in terms of the working age population and the issues that we need to deal with there. So that's part of it. The next part is going earlier in life, adolescence. Most of the neurons in your brain get created in the trillions in the first 3 years or 4 years of life. Extraordinary, right? And so most of the connections of your brain, the synapses, as well as the neurons, are developed in the first 3 or 4 years of life. So that period of life turns out to be mighty important in terms of how your neurons, how many neurons you get, and what kind of connections you have among those neurons. Sort of the last set of neurons and synapses in your brain that get created are in the frontal temporal lobe, which is the part of your brain that actually controls emotion and discipline and control. Hence, for anyone that's had a teenager, they know that the frontal temporal lobe is the last to develop because teenagers are very much not in control. So teenagers are at risk for addiction. Whether it's sports gambling addiction, whether it's drug addiction. For girls, it is addiction in the sense of social media and boys. And so we've seen increasing rates of suicidal thoughts or suicidal actions or self-harm in young people. That is a brain problem. So we have been characterizing it as addiction, and we characterize anxiety, depression, and psychosis as mental health. Those are all brain problems. Now, the question is, can we begin to develop solutions for brain disorders that cross all of these boundaries by being able to detect anomalies in the brain performance at an early age, teenagers, youth, middle age, in ways that basically is a serious way to create business opportunities for those that invest in the space. And quite frankly, it is a strategy to prevent Alzheimer's. It is a strategy to prevent Alzheimer's. So that is part of our mission. Our mission is to prevent Alzheimer's. We'll do that through a therapeutic intervention. The current drugs are there. You can ask me about those, but those are there. We're looking on vaccines and thus a product that can be introduced in people who have the pathology of the disease, but don't yet have symptoms? Can we introduce a therapeutic intervention there to prevent symptoms? Can we actually go earlier with a true vaccine in your 40s and 50s and actually prevent the pathologies that are linked to Alzheimer's in midlife? And so those are therapeutic interventions. But this notion of brain health is another strategy on how to reduce the risk of getting that disease and building the resilience of the brains that can resist the disease. It is another prong on the strategy to prevent Alzheimer's.
Mm-hmm. Staying on that the workplace brain health topic for a minute, because I've had the opportunity to have several chief medical officers at organizations like Pepsi, Jaguar Land Rover, Chevron on the show. So the unifying statement has always been, look, we chief medical officers no longer are somebody you keep in the back room anymore. When there's an emergency, we have to be front and center for issues like this that you're talking about. In terms of the this unified framework for workplace brain health that you worked on with the McKinsey Health Institute, any interesting cases that you could talk about there or highlight? Because clearly, you went into sort of all the interesting things you could do for sleep and stress management and social support and other activities, because so many of us are, in a workplace setting. Any just interesting anecdotes along the way from that particular aspect of what you were discussing at the Brain House?
Well, there are a couple of very interesting. One is from an energy company of size, close to in size the company you just mentioned, Chevron, but not Chevron, in which they took the number of mental health visits they allowed their employees from a half dozen a year to like 70. And what they did was they did it over 5 years. And they found that it reduced their overall health costs because employees were more motivated. They are better able to deal with their stress, whether it's the stress at work or the stress of caregiving for a child or an adult at home at the same time they're working, whether it was the stress of safety issues at work. But there are a variety of stressors that occur during the course of work, which if you deal with them, you not only begin to enable employees to identify stressors and be able themselves to self-care, but they also get more motivated about staying with the company that cares about them, and they stay more motivated about the company's purpose as they are given additional support during the course of their work life. It turns out doing all those things also is preventing reducing the risk of later life Alzheimer's. Another one was interesting, was a completely different tack, which was there's some research that suggests if you have a close friend at work, that you're more likely to stay with the company. So what the company did was create social circles at work, and then invested in workers being able to participate in social activities in their communities, join the school board, coach a local sports team. And they actually supported employees who did that and created more of those work relationships. They never called it anything about mental health, or they didn't use the word health. They just saw that developing socialization skills and an appetite for socialization and increasing relationships and the ability to create relationships at work or outside of work was a huge retention capability. Now, it turns out that lack of socialization, loneliness, is a risk factor for Alzheimer's. So being able to keep those social relationships, the quality and quantity of your relationships is a major factor in maintaining your brain capacity and your brain resilience. So those are a couple of examples that we've come across. The latter one was actually not an energy company, but a power company. So they're not companies in the health space, actually. They're companies that are general business companies.
Got it. No, those are really interesting examples. George, one of the other, we're in these interesting terms, and another interesting one that was that popped up at the in Davos back in January was this. I think this is from someone from Norway's sovereign wealth fund, and the title of the presentation is "Transforming Sovereign Wealth into Mental Wealth," and it goes into this topic of so-called social production and sort of these activities that contribute to the production of the formal economy, but folks don't get paid for. And obviously, perfect example is caregiving for a family member with dementia, Alzheimer's, which many of us have had that experience, or other chronic degenerative diseases. This is a very important topic because folks will talk about sort of this unpaid caregiver number all the time, this informal $1 trillion or so that we're missing out on because it's not there, but people are still doing this economic production alongside everything else they're doing. Can you say a couple words about mental wealth and some of what you learned from sort of this Norway example, but in general about how we can sort of connect some of these social production initiatives into the big picture here that we're talking about?
Well, let me think about this a second. If you think about the 20th century, where our lifespan has been, our estimated lifespan has gone from maybe 40 to 45 years old to 80 years old, and think of the economic growth that has occurred in the 20th century, you'd say to yourself, this has been a good thing. But how long can we extend life? So now people are talking more about health span, as you mentioned earlier, rather than just lifespan. But the qualities that cause you to have a good life and to be productive in life turn out to occur all during your life. So the social power of a country, the ability of that country to thrive, is based upon its connectedness, its togetherness, its lack of polarization, its increased community, the participation of people in voluntary activities in their communities, or as I used with the example of the company that actually invested in this sort of social connectability in their workforce.
Mm-hmm.
There is a social power in having good quality relationships at scale. And I think we can get very airy-fairy about this in a sense, but it is a very basic human need to have friends when you're experiencing a time of need. We have friends with whom you can enjoy a dinner, a time together, enjoying your family. That kind of social power gives you confidence that you can go into the world with a certain stability in your life that gives you confidence about what you can do. So this notion of social production is intriguing. It's hard to get at, outside of concrete tactics or strategies that can be measured and assessed in terms of the contribution of a philanthropic individual or return-oriented investment in things that actually will increase that social capacity of a country to do voluntary acts, participate in voluntary activities. As it relates to Alzheimer's, as I said before, loneliness and social isolation is a real risk factor because it turns out that you and I talking requires us to use our brains. I have to listen to what you said. Hopefully, I responded to what you said. That takes a little brain power. And as a consequence, if you do more of that, your brain creates more synapses, more connections, more memories, more a variety of capacities of your brain. So the more you do that at a social level, the more your brain is able to resist potential brain disorders or general disorders or loneliness or the like. So social interaction is a very powerful societal need, individual need, and it produces, I think, a resistance to many brain disorders, not all. A stroke is another thing. Epilepsy is another thing. But the basically social connections is a very powerful human driver as well as a social and economic driver of a country's progress.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What should we know about that's happening per the global South? I mean, I know you're very active in bringing, all folks together, in these initiatives. Clearly, we probably don't hear as much about, whether it's Nigeria or Brazil or Indonesia or a lot of things that are happening in other parts of the world. But we are all, again, potential, victims of this onslaught of dementia and Alzheimer's disease that most are predicting is, as we've been chatting, is a major economic financial threat. What's happening in the global south that we should know about? Are they doing things better there? Any interesting success stories along those lines as you convene these thought leaders from all corners? What's happening we should know about?
Well, the global south has a different demographic issue than the global north. By the global north right now, I mean the United States, Europe, Japan, and China, where basically the population is aging rapidly, and where you have fewer workers to support an economy of larger numbers of people. The global south has still a great deal of young people. And while the rate of births per woman is going down, they still have a big bolus of young people. And so they have an interest in this early life or life course approach because they want to build the capacity of their young people to be the workers of the future, both for their own economic growth inside Africa, but if in fact those workers go to the north to replace what we may need in terms of a workforce, their remittances coming back to Africa will be higher. So they have an economic interest in the brain resilience and health of their infants, their adolescents, and their young people and their future workers. So they also are seeing what's happening in the global north. And their populations in the global south, while not as dramatic as the global north, are rising, and they can see what's happening in the global north. So they care about both ends of the age spectrum in ways that the global north does not. So they are much more intrigued by this notion of brain health across the lifespan. So we are announcing this week a brain health plan for Africa, all 5 regions of Africa. South Africa will lead the Southern Africa as African effort. Nigeria will lead the West Africa English-speaking population. Cameroon will lead the West African French-speaking population. Kenya, the East Africa, and Egypt, North Africa. Those countries and the researchers in those countries are coming together. We organized them in Nairobi, Kenya last year, but now they're announcing a 5-year plan that has 6 priorities to it for all of Africa on dealing with this life course issue. So part of it is getting rid of the stigma of brain disease. Whether it be epilepsy, whether it be autism, whether it be dementia. The people with brain disorders right now are still regarded as crazy, demented, and maybe occupied by the devil. But they're also, they're highly fragmented in Europe. So bringing people together across both sector silos, from researchers to governments to business, is important. The new tools, the technology tools that we now have available, which could be uniquely introduced and leapfrog some of the ways that we're dealing with this problem in our health systems, because we now have AI and machine learning, which potentially could be able to identify lifetime risk or resilience factors at an individual level using cell phones. So between cell phones and AI, the possibilities of doing things differently in the South is growing. We're also looking at how to validate and deploy lower cost tools for detecting cognitive impairment, typically now off a cell phone using your voice, how to collect blood, not through even a blood draw in your arm, but through a blood spot, your pinprick on your finger, or saliva for genetic information, but to collect that data across using lower cost tools and more effective and distributed tools to actually deploy interventions. So we're working in the global south because that's where most of the dementia cases are and will be, and also because they have unique demographic and economic and health system environments to which there are going to be different responses.
And this is one initiative that you're going to be talking about, no doubt, at the upcoming, that's coming up in a couple of days, the Alzheimer's Association International Conference in Toronto from the 27th to the 31st. What else are you going to be talking about? I'm sure there's a lot of sessions, keynotes, plenary sessions, and so forth. What else is happening at AAIC in terms of you and your organization?
Well, I think we're going to be talking a lot about all of what we've just talked about. But we have 30 different posters. We have about 10 different convenings and meetings of hundreds to 200 people each. Around what? The most immediate problem is how to get the current disease-modifying drugs more effectively deployed in the United States, Japan, China. Because quite frankly, if I were a company that had one of those, I'd be struggling to justify continued investment in this space if, in fact, I can't get those people to people who have been detected with cognitive impairment and diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so the health system thing is very important. So blood tests are going to be a big topic of conversation. The Alzheimer's Association, is going to announce some of their guidelines, which may be inconsistent with the guidelines that we have announced, because we think these blood tests can be used not only by neurologists, but by primary care physicians and even nurses. And the blood test ordering that's going on now is rapidly increasing. So blood tests are going to be important. How to detect cognitive impairment without sitting down for an hour-long paper and pencil test. So digital cognitive assessments are going to be those. But so the immediate problem is how to get more attention paid to these disease-modifying drugs, which are transformative to the field, and how to get patients and their own doctors more tuned to making personalized decisions about whether to use these new drugs. Because the drugs, while good, have side effects. The next, so the health system thing, both here, Europe, and in South America, in Global South, are going to be big issues. The next level is what's next. So there's going to be a good deal of attention paid to clinical trials of products that are introduced in populations who do not have symptoms, but who have the pathology of the disease. Because we now know that the pathology of this disease starts 20 to 30 years before symptoms. Introduce drugs then. That raises a whole bunch of issues. Who ought to get that blood test to determine whether you have the pathology? To whom ought to get those drugs? What are the costs of those drugs? We're going to have the health system, again, sort of being very conservative force in terms of their willingness to do blood tests for individuals who don't seem to be sick, don't have any cognitive impairment, but for whom drugs might be very powerful in slowing the disease down before symptoms, and thus having a bigger effect in terms of delaying the time by which you're going to need caregivers. So that's going to be a big topic. There's going to be a topic about primary prevention, vaccines. So that's going to be a big topic. And I think there's going to be a big topic around this notion of brain health, because the Alzheimer's Association is doing a very large study in the United States called the Pointer Study, in which they are basically looking at can you reduce the risk of Alzheimer's through risk reduction. And so they're going to be announcing the results of that, which we think probably are going to be positive. So there'll be a good deal of discussion about this brain health notion. And so while they'll be talking about it in the United States, we'll be talking about it in the rest of the world. But that will be a big topic of conversation. But there will be a lot of interesting scientific advances that will be discussed. But in terms of patient stuff, those are the things. How do we get the health system ready to advise us better on taking these medicines now? What are the medicines that will be out in the next couple of years? When are the vaccines coming? That could be 5 to 10 years. You mentioned before, should we wait to what happens in 2050? I am hopeful that we're going to have a vaccine in the next 5 to 10 years that will prevent the pathology of this disease. Then getting it widely distributed is going to be a challenge because, as we saw with COVID, most parts of the world didn't get those COVID vaccines for a very long time. So that will be a challenge. And then I think this whole brain health notion is going to rise as a topic of major conversation.
Yeah, I really look forward to all the sessions. I have to ask though, as I mentioned, the organization advocates for increased research funding and policy changes. I'm in Philly, DC's, 120 miles that direction right now, and I've had the opportunity to host some really great thought leaders from NIH, from HHS, from FDA on this show that aren't there anymore. Talk, while we have you, George, and talk a little bit about your feelings about what's happening down there. Clearly, some of these changes are not useful, especially when we want to cure and prevent disease. I take that in any direction you want to go with it, but it's a kind of critical time right now as we're talking.
Well, I do regard the attack on funding for academic institutions and on the NIH as a true risk to the future of efforts in my space. And we are very active as an advocacy organization, working with advocacy organizations in cancer and heart and lung disease and diabetes and rare diseases as a unified, united for cures set of organizations at a very tactical level in congressional districts that are marginal and contested, and thus where incumbents, Republican incumbents, should be thinking twice about voting for the president's budget. With that said, we have enormous support in Congress. Over the years, this has been a bipartisan issue. This disease attacks Republicans and Democrats. This disease affects, just about everybody. And so we have good support in Congress. And I think that the president's budget will get significantly mitigated by the support that we get in Congress. The House appropriations process is actually recommended some cuts, and all cuts are not good, but some cuts, but way better than the president's budget. We'll see what the Senate does in September, but I am hopeful that we will not see such damage to the NIH, the FDA, CDC, and the academic medical enterprise that we can't recover from it. Now, it's the way this has gone about has not been a rational process of deciding what to cut, where to cut, and which people to cut. And as a consequence, we're losing good people out of government that the government itself doesn't even want to lose, simply because the way that they're being treated is disrespectful, mean, and unpredictable. So I think that is a problem of maintaining the staffs of these organizations while reducing the numbers, because every organization can do probably better, cheaper, and more efficiently with a rational process of reform. But we may be losing people we don't want to lose because, in fact, they're either being fired arbitrarily or they're leaving because they can't trust their employer and the environment in which they're being asked to work is hostile. So I think it's a troubling time. It is a troubling time not just here in the United States, but for the global health community, as substantial cuts to PEPFAR and our USAID have dramatically affected the ability of the global South to deal with infectious disease and the expected having that we've actually halved the rate of maternal deaths over the last 25 years. Maternal deaths are expected to start rising again. So we're going to start seeing some major impacts in real deaths pretty soon globally. And of course, the pressure caused by the Ukraine-Russia conflict has caused Europe to increase its defense spending and reduce its global health spending too. So we're seeing a restructuring of the global health funding environment, which is adverse to people in the global south. But we learn a lot from people and what we do in the global south and what affects us in the global north. One example is HIV/AIDS. I mean, this is a problem that, if allowed to sort of revive, puts our own population at risk. There are trials in the Alzheimer's space which by recruiting populations in the global south and the global north, we have the ability to attack Alzheimer's in some of its rarer forms, genetically driven forms. But if you cut off the non-US part of that, the trials aren't large enough to proceed. So the cuts are having an immediate adverse impact, but there are, I believe, reasons for a little, not hope, but a little less than total despair, put it that way.
That's a good way to put it. That's a good way to put it.
But
George,
they're good. It's a good question, and we will find out probably by the end of the year or early next year what has been damaged and can be repaired, and what has been destroyed and may have to be rebuilt. It'll take a little time, but we'll find that out. Time will pass, time will go on, and most of the companies we talk about are not withdrawing from the field. They basically say to us, our timeline is longer than 4 years.
Right. Right.
So they are staying in the game. They know the unmet need is growing, that the unmet need is huge, and they're staying in the game. And of course, we're championing that innovation and the hope that they will not only stay in the game, but they'll be successful in the game.
Got it. Got it. George, I mentioned, okay, the AIC conference is coming up in a couple of days. You mentioned at the beginning, but I just wanted to restate the Global Alzheimer's Initiative Now Act, or GAIN Act. Could you just say a couple words about what's happening there? Because I just want to stress, as you were saying, not all is hopeless, but there are very important legislative things happening as well. And I was wondering if you could just say a couple minutes about what that is all about and DAC's involvement in it.
Now, this is a piece of legislation that's been introduced in the House on a bipartisan basis, which would authorize the United States government to actually contribute to the Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative and the Global Mechanism for Alzheimer's, up to 1/3 of the total funds. So we would have to find funding from 3 times whatever the government commits to, or maybe twice, if my arithmetic is correct. They would contribute 1/3. We'd have to find 2/3 from other sources. We've talked to the UK. They're quite interested in this, but of course their defense spending has now gone up. We've talked to Japan. They're interested in it, but their defense spending is now rising because of the threats from China. But the industry is still engaged, and we believe Bill Gates has been, well, he has basically term limited his Gates Foundation. He is keeping in place his own personal foundation, which is equal in size to the Gates Foundation, called Gates Ventures. And that's where he's put his Alzheimer's efforts. So we're hopeful that the Gates Foundation, the Wellcome Trust, major global foundations might match the United States funding, much as they've done with PEPFAR and Gavi and other global mechanisms. So the GAIN Act is basically a legislative effort to authorize and appropriate up to 1/3 of funding for a global effort to prevent Alzheimer's.
George, final messages while we have you today. I mean, obviously a lot going on. anything that I missed that's coming up for the remainder of 2025, other conferences, talks, anything I forgot to ask you about while we have you today? I really do appreciate your time, but please,
I
final
think
messages.
there's one other major trial that will read out this fall, and that is whether GLP-1s
Yeah.
independently have the ability to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's, to actually reduce the pathology associated with the disease and become a disease modifying therapy in and of themselves. That results, we believe, will be announced in December at another major Alzheimer's conference called the Clinical Trials in Alzheimer's Disease, or CTAD, conference in December. So I think that is an interesting thing to look for. The other things in the fall, there will be major meetings at the United Nations General Assembly and in the UN building on making this a global issue and getting the education, UNICEF or UNESCO or the International Labor Organization or the International Trade Organization, WHO, all concurring in this new brain health approach. So that will be a major effort. There will be, I think, announcements in the fall on some of the elements of what might that brain health thesis look like in action. So potential announcements around financing vehicles, potential announcements about unifying the regional efforts that are happening in Houston, Texas, and Alberta, Canada, in Singapore, in Paris, at a regional level or a subnational level, shall I say it that way, a subnational level on productivity in the workforce and building the capacity of our brains in terms of, as we talked earlier, about productivity and brain capital. So there will be things on the international front. There will be things in the GLP-1 space, which will be intriguing. There's a possibility, albeit slim, but probably will be announced in the first half of 26 on the outcome of one of these secondary prevention trials, the trial of a drug in preclinical populations. So those are the things that I'm looking for. There'll be an announcement of the companies that currently have those drugs in trial now are Eisai Biogen Partnership and Lilly, but there'll be a third major pharma announcing a potential preclinical trial at AAIC. So that's exciting. So this notion of marching earlier in the course of the disease, slowing it down with greater clinical benefit and possibly fewer side effects is really exciting over the next 18 months or so, really exciting. And the whole brain health notion, does it have substance? What does it mean? What is the action plan to move to a brain health, brain capital world, and a brain economy world? That will take some form, increasing form during the rest of this year. And of course, we have Davos 2026, where we will have Brain House again, with a number of these forces coming together to celebrate the progress that we've made in 25 and look forward to 2026. But I would say this is a time of great, I'd say, progress, but still at the edge of change. The disease-modifying drugs gave us great hope, and the future drug developments here give us more hope. But still, this disease is affecting so many people every day around the world that we can only say that we've only made the first step on a march of 20,000 leagues, as they used to say. So we have a long way to go. And hopefully your efforts, Ira, are going to give some more impetus and at least education and information to the American people about the importance of this disease.
We will do everything we can to get the message out there, because it's an extremely important message, and it's just quite amazing how you're championing this, George, and just wishing you and the team continued success in meeting these milestones. Again, for everybody out there that is going to be listening to this episode of the show across the various podcast networks, or who will be watching on the YouTube channel. Again, you've been spending time with George Vradenburg, chairman and co-founder, Us Against Alzheimer's, founding member, World Dementia Council, founding chairman, Davos Alzheimer's Collaborative, doing really amazing things to ending Alzheimer's disease. George, I want to thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to talk to us for a little while today about all these topics. Thank you for everything you do. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for helping to create a better tomorrow for literally millions of people out there. Be what you're doing. Really a great story.
Good to be with you, Ira, and thank you for what you're doing.
Great having you.